then we end up being successful despite the numbers, though we need to still keep an eye on those numbers, that at any given time, those numbers are moving. It may be painfully slow, but they are moving, and they are moving effectively. Thanks.
Yeah, no, I think that is a really, really great point to make, and it really reminds me a lot of the kind of glass cliff analogy that Alex had brought up. That it's not enough to kind of just say, oh, we're going to put these numbers out here and we want women to be involved, but you actually have to succeed, right? And you have to kind of, and this really kind of, I think, points to me to a lot of these practical and structural barriers that still need to be broken down in order for the vision to be successful, right? In order to actually take the steps that are necessary to achieve the goals that we outline for ourselves.
Thank you for the floor and also for the amazing intervention. It is so to the spot and extremely important what you have just said. I would like to complement this by saying that there is this overall dynamics that it's the burden of women to advocate for themselves, to sit at the table, because if they're not there, nobody will speak for them. And then there is also this burden of women being educated and being capacitated and have the networks and have the confidence. And I think this is also a conceptual barrier that we need to break down. So of course we need the education, as you mentioned, that is really the starting and the end point to empower women. But let's face the fact that all the men who are sitting around the table may not have the adequate education, may not have the adequate training to be there, but they just sit there and they speak their mind. So I think we should also really distinguish between how much additional barriers we put to women. We send them to more trainings and to another degree and to another something. Women who may not be able to read and write can still sit at the table and advocate for the interest of their own community and for their own population. And then I think men have a very important role to play in this, starting from redistributing family responsibilities to enable women to spend their time on public affairs, and also to make men accountable who sit around the table, to put on the perspective of women, even if it's only one woman, even if it's, to start with, so that the burden is not only on the shoulders of women, but also men are really held accountable for advocating for these goals.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point about it's extremely important, right, that we men understand really their responsibilities and duties under this vision as well, right? Like that's an important part of communicating the vision and understanding how to build that coalition and get that buy-in from the broad contours of the coalition.
I have to say that in years past, when we have done a program on this topic and there have been more men in the room, we've gotten at least one comment from a male diplomat saying, "You all are empowered, feel free," and it's remarkable how you think about, like, this person took the initiative to go to this program, right? And yet that at the end of the program was their point of view, right? That, like, we are held back in our minds and we should just feel free to speak, right? And not hold ourselves back. So there's a lot of work still to be done. I do a lot of work relating to inclusion and empowerment of women within companies here in the US. And every time they ask me to train the women, I let them know that I'll train the women if I can also train the men, right? The senior managers. Because a lot of these barriers that we see that Jackson was talking about are replicated in the private sector also, right? That first promotion into management often doesn't happen because of bias by the manager or other conditions, right? Starting from earlier on, inequalities of access, right? So there's that. And then as you get more senior, there are more and more barriers. And then there's still this pervasive mindset amongst some that there are no barriers except the ones in our own minds. So we have a lot of educating still to do. Absolutely.
Yeah. Are there any other observations, comments people would like to make? Yeah, go ahead.
You remember seeing it was something happening, and there was this lady sitting amongst and the congressman or whatever person was telling me, how long have you been a stewardess? She was like, I'm the pilot.
Yes.
And so it's this social perception of women in the room. We can never be leaders. We can never be perceived as leaders or taking charge. It brings me also to, it's a story. Minerva Bernardino is a Dominican Republic. I'm from the Dominican Republic. So I'm going to bring this because I think it's a great example. She was an ambassador. She was one of the 4 women that signed the Charter of the UN. And it was a meeting happening in the General Assembly. And an ambassador got up and he was saying, this was during one of the General Assemblies, and he said, women and ambassadors. Miss Bernardino got up and she said, in this room, we are diplomats, we are ambassadors. If you want to call me a woman, you can ask me for a cup of coffee at the end of the assembly. But in this room, we are all leaders. And she stood up for herself and for all the women there. But it's the social perception that women cannot be leaders, that somehow we are just there, like this lady said, to adorn the room, to make, make the room pretty or whatever. But yes, it's a social perception can be a huge barrier in order to enable women to, Thank you, guys. Yeah,
absolutely. I think that's very astute, right? And it goes back to these kind of practical and structural barriers and really in a lot of ways these conceptual barriers as well, where a lot of men just don't have that framework and need to develop that framework, right? So that's an important part of removing these barriers in order to achieve the vision that we set forth. Anything else?
Thank you. I just wanted to build on my colleagues' very astute and accurate points. It's not, I think someone said before that it's not just a women's problem, and that's how it's sometimes portrayed, but we need men as allies. And the example of deals are done on a golf course or outside the normal structured negotiation. All it takes is one man in that group to open the door and say, why don't you come in and participate as well? And then, the flow-on effects, you can then invite other people. I think it's important to make sure that we're not only elevating the issue to men, but letting them know where these barriers exist, because some of them are clearly not aware of the barriers, and telling them this is how you can open the door and this is the opportunities that we need, and all we need is one person. Yes, I think very, very excellent points.
All right, here's where I'm gonna make a point that might be somewhat controversial. But one technique that I have used and I have taught where we are trying to cultivate male allies is a technique from behavior modification therapy. Okay. Yes. So this is a therapy that can be used for children and adults who are learning to create new neural pathways in their brain. Okay, developmentally. And what it requires is that when somebody does something that is a preferred behavior, that you immediately reward them. Okay. So there have been times that I've been in meetings at Columbia Law School, right? We have a lot of women on the faculty, and yet in certain meetings, right, the same people are speaking, the same people are making decisions. And there was a man in charge of an important initiative who never amplified us or, raised our concerns. He finally did it once in a meeting. And so I pulled out my phone in the meeting while it was still going on and said, I'll use a fake name, Dear Bob, right? Just wanted you to know that every woman in the room noticed what you did just now, right? Your voice carries a lot of weight. We noticed that you used it for our behalf and wanted to thank you for your allyship, right? Some men will not respond to this. They cannot be helped. However, many will respond if they are given positive reinforcement for a specific activity. So I used this immediately, right? With children, sometimes they will pop an M&M in their mouth or like a candy, right? It's like an immediate, you did something great, right? Good job. Did that and started to notice more amplification coming, right? So sometimes there can be, we call this in mediation stroking, okay? It is a truthful acknowledgement of something somebody has done. It must be truthful. So I was not going to say thank you for being a champion for gender equity because that was not accurate. But I could say your voice carries a lot of weight. You used it today, right? I appreciated it. I know every woman in the room appreciated it, right? Thank you for your leadership on this issue. That is truthful, and for some people, that will create the conditions where there you can expect more of it. Is it frustrating and at times enraging that we need to do this? Yes. On the other hand, it can be effective in cultivating allies. If the issue is really blindness and not outright prejudice, sometimes techniques like this can call somebody in, as Jackson was saying, to the fold. The other benefit of this is that it doesn't work, then you know that you have a leader who maybe cannot be helped and that you need to cultivate other allies and go around that person to try to effect change. So.
Yeah, that is a great way to get into the next step that we'll talk about. So unless there are any more.
No, I think we can move ahead. I'll be very interested to see what the chat looks like after that.
So absolutely. So the next step is generating short-term wins. This is one of my favorites because I think it's a lot of fun. And it highlights some of these kind of things we were just talking about, right? So generating short-term wins, at its most basic is just kind of like creating these, small incentives or kind of these small rewards that allow people to keep their eye on the ball and like keep an idea, okay, this is the big picture, and feel like, okay, I'm making progress. Like each step counts and gets me closer to it. And so some of that can be as simple as just kind of acknowledging these historic firsts. Like